Hello students, I am Sister Nelsa from the Department of English, Patna Women's College. Today we shall learn about business communication, which is most important in our day-to-day life. Let us divide our lesson in 4 parts. First, meaning of communication. Second, definition of communication. Third, elements of communication process. Fourth, process of communication. As a way of introduction, let us understand what communication is. The word communication is derived from the Latin word communis, which means to share or to impart or to commune. And what do we share? We share our ideas, concepts, feelings, and emotions. The science of communication is almost as old as humans. From time immemorial, there has been a felt need to share or to communicate. As a result, different vehicles or channels were identified and subsequently improvised for the purpose of transmission of ideas and concepts. Now, a question arises. What is the importance of communication and why should this be studied? And the answer to these questions will be understood as we proceed further gradually through this lesson. As it is said from earlier times that man is a social animal or human beings are social animals. In other words, it is essential that we communicate with each other to live in a better way. The ability to communicate is much more than a composition of certain physical attributes, vocal cords, and articulators. It is the ability to symbolize or to understand concepts in terms of images or much more than an understanding of the spoken or written language. It is a composite of symbols, gestures, and illustrations that accompany either the spoken or written word. Let us look at the second part, that is, definition of communication. According to AMA, American Management Association, communication is any behavior that results in an exchange of meaning. And Baer Jr. E. John defines communication as communication is the process involving the transmission and reception of symbols, eliciting meaning in the minds of the participants by making common their life experiences. George T. Vardaman says, effective communication is purposive symbolic interchange resulting in workable understanding and agreement between the sender and the receiver. From all the above said definitions, we understand that communication is a process and it is a two-way process. In a communication, there should be an exchange of idea, there should be a sender, a message, a channel, and a receiver, and most importantly, there should be feedback from the receiver. Only then a communication process is called complete. Let us now come to the third section, that is, the elements of a communication process. Communication, as we have seen, is a two-way process in which there is an exchange and progression of ideas towards a mutually accepted direction or goal. To materialize this process, it is essential that the basic elements of communication be identified. There are 5 elements: sender or encoder or speaker, receiver, decoder or listener, message, medium, feedback. Let us now try to understand these 5 elements one by one. The first one is sender. The person who initiates the communication process is normally referred to as the sender. Receiver. The receiver is the one who receives the message, decodes it, and tries to respond the way it is expected of him. Message. Message is the encoded idea transmitted by the sender. Medium. The channel that is used to transfer the message. It can be oral or written or nonverbal. Feedback. This is the element that completes the communication process, that is, the response from the receiver to the sender. Before we proceed to the process of communication, let us recap all that we have learned till now. The word communication is derived from the Latin word communis, which means to share. Communication is a two-way process and it is successful only when the sender receives the feedback from the receiver. And the 5 elements that we need to keep in mind are sender, receiver, message, medium, and feedback. Now, let us proceed to the process of communication. Communication is a dynamic, interactive process that involves the effective transmission of facts, ideas, thoughts, feelings, and values. It is not passive and does not just happen. We actively and consciously engage in communication to develop the information and understanding required for effective group functioning. The word process suggests that communication exists as a flow through a sequence or series of steps. The term process also indicates a condition of flux and change. The relationship of people engaged in communication continuously grow and develop. Communication is a dynamic, interactive process. It consists of 5 steps: ideation, encoding, transmission, decoding, and response. Ideation. The process of communication begins with ideation, which refers to the formation of the idea or selection of a message to be communicated. It consists of what of communication and is concerned with the content of the specific message to be presented. The scope of ideation is generally determined by the sender's knowledge, experiences, and abilities, as well as the purpose of communication and the context of the communicative situation. Encoding. Encoding is the next step in communication. It is the process of changing the information into some form of logical and coded message. The encoding process is based on the purpose of communication and the relation between the sender and the receiver. In a formal situation, encoding involves selecting a language, selecting a medium of communication, selecting an appropriate communication form, selecting a right language is essential for effective encoding. Verbal messages need a common language code which can be easily decoded by the receiver. If the receiver is unable to decode or understand the message, communication will fail. For example, a person who does not understand Tamil cannot decode a message encoded in Tamil. Transmission. Transmission refers to the flow of message over the chosen channel. Transmission confirms the medium selected during the process of encoding and keeps the communication channel free from interference or noise so that the message reaches the receiver without any disturbance. It is one of the most basic aspects of communication because it also involves the proper time, that is, when to communicate, proper place, where to communicate, and a proper way how to communicate. For example, if a student wants to inform the teacher about her being absent for the next day's class, she will choose a proper way of communicating the same to the teacher. For communication to be effective, it is essential that the right time, the right place, and the right method is chosen. Decoding. Decoding is the process of converting a message into thoughts by translating the received stimuli into an interpreted meaning in order to understand the message communicated. It is important to note that it is the message that is transferred, as meaning cannot be transferred from one person to another. The receiver must assign meaning to a message to understand it. The process of decoding involves interpretation and analysis of a message. Effective decoding is very important for successful communication, as any misinterpretation of a message leads to communication breakdown and creates confusion and misunderstanding. Response. Response is the last stage in the communication process. It is the action or the reaction of the receiver to the message. It helps the sender know that the message was received and understood. The feedback that goes to the sender makes it clear whether the receiver has accepted the information and filed it in his memory or rejected it. The receiver is free to ask for more information or clarification if necessary. Thus, responses is the key to communication, as the effectiveness of communication depends on how congruent a receiver's response is with the meaning intended by the sender. Before we close this lesson, let us recap all that we have done today. We learnt the meaning of communication, definition of communication, elements of communication, and the process of communication. One of the most important elements of communication is the response or the feedback, because for a successful completion of the communication process, feedback is very important. We will be learning about the methods of communication in the next class. Thank you.